been telling you for years that onshore is the new offshore. Old school tax havens like Marshall Islands or Vanuatu, no longer the go-to place to incorporate your business. But there's a particular type of offshore company that I would never recommend, and I'm going to tell you about it today. So if you've ever found one of what I call the incorporation mills in your internet search for an offshore company, you've probably seen what we call a shelf company. I'm going to talk about that today. An incorporation mill is a company where they just churn out corporation after corporation after corporation, maybe thousands by the month, without any regard for whether you should pay taxes, where you'll pay taxes, what your goals are, why you want the company, how are you going to use the company, what happens after you have the company. That's not their concern. They basically just show you, hey, we've got the British Virgin Islands, we've got Nevis, we've got Hong Kong. You're like, you know what, that Nevis stock photo looks pretty good. I think I'll do that one. I'll make my important incorporation decisions based on Shutterstock photos. And so they set up the company and you're off to the races, really not knowing what to do. And then they say they'll open up a bank account for you. And the only bank they've ever heard of for these incorporation mills is HSBC in Hong Kong. And HSBC in Hong Kong doesn't want bank accounts because HSBC is the world's worst bank. And if you get an account open, they'll close it. And you have to go to a basement and get your money out. I'm getting ahead of myself. If it's your first time here, my name's Andrew Henderson. I'm the founder of a boutique consultancy called Nomad Capitalist. We help 7- and 8-figure entrepreneurs and investors legally reduce your taxes overseas, diversify and protect your assets, and increase your freedom and options with things like second passports. I'm also the host of the biggest and best offshore conference called Nomad Capitalist Live. And what I just described was an incorporation mill. Again, they're turning out companies by the thousands with no real advice. Now, even though I don't use these services personally, I suppose someone who's been in the industry for a long time could use these services, and I know how to get the proper tax advice and how to structure things to where I could use a company. And heck, there are some limited circumstances where a Marshall Islands company or something like that in some far-flung jurisdiction could fit the bill. But for most people who are setting up a company to run an online business or to do some kind of investments, you probably want to have an offshore company in a more reputable jurisdiction now that banks are becoming more strict. Just for many reasons you want to have that. That should go unsaid. But there's a type of company that you might find on these incorporation mill websites, which is called the shelf company. And what this is basically a company that's already set up with some kind of weird name like Evergreen Jasmine Super Trading Limited, that allegedly make you seem like you're a more serious company. The idea being this incorporation mill set up Evergreen Jasmine Super Trading Company Limited back in 2006, and so therefore you're going to print out your stationery and you're going to have your logo at the top, and it's going to say, since 2006, and that's supposed to fool your customers. They say it's maybe easier to get bank accounts because banks want to work with serious companies that have been around. They don't want these fly-by-night operations. They'll even say, and I heard this for many years in the US with Nevada corporations, it's easier to get credit. You set up your experienced company, you take the ownership over, you don't have to worry about setting it up. It's ready right off the shelf. That's why they call it a shelf company. They've already have it sitting on their shelf. You don't need to go through the long, arduous process of setting up a company. You just take over ownership of Jasmine Evergreen Super Happy Trading Company Limited from some incorporator in Hong Kong. And that's really what a lot of the names of these companies are. It's Prosperity Consulting Moon Pty Limited. And they just got a bunch of these really weird company names that are sitting on the shelf ready for you to take them over, not understanding the fact that number one, is anyone still using stationery? Established in 2006. Nomad Capitalist, we are celebrating our 10th year of providing content to you and serving clients and customers. But we don't really stake our reputation around that. And we say it because we've actually been around for 10 years, not because I bought some company off the shelf 10 years ago and just decided 3 weeks ago to start rolling out of bed and recording these YouTube videos. We've actually been here for 10 years. I would think in today's modern world of business, where transparency is key, just saying we started the company the day that some accountant in Hong Kong or the British Virgin Islands established a shelf company with some weird name you didn't come up with doesn't really convey trust with your customers. But on top of that, let's go through the reasons why a shelf company doesn't make sense. And I think this is pretty old school, but I wanted to cover it because some of you had asked. Number one, you can form a company in some jurisdictions in as little as a day or even an hour or two. The longest it should take is like a week or two max. Certainly if you're setting up, let's say, like a US part of your structure. You may, if you're not a U.S. person, have to go out and get a tax ID, and there's a longer process for like the banking and all that. You need to get an EIN. I mean, there's different things associated with that. But just the company setup itself isn't what takes a long time. That's the case in a lot of jurisdictions. Really, any offshore jurisdiction works at salt. They're not going to like make you wait around for months to open a company. And so I don't know of any example where like you couldn't wait a couple of days. Particularly because in many cases today, your company's not going to bank where it's incorporated. If you're incorporating in Hong Kong, some people might find a Hong Kong account to open. More people are going to find a fintech in Hong Kong that they would open with. And those fintechs might, with a little bit more effort, take an offshore company that's not in Hong Kong. And so the Hong Kong piece doesn't really help you with banking. The British Virgin Islands, the Cayman Islands, if you don't have a connection to these countries, it's not going to be necessarily an easy process to get a bank account. So you're going to be going to some other country and getting a bank account separately, in which case the idea, this old school thing like, hey, I'm in Panama, I want to open a bank account for this company. Sure, Panama companies can open Panama bank accounts. You never know which bank to go to. They've got 87 different banks. You never know which one's going to accept you on that given day. It's really a very moody process. And so I guess that's the only reason where it's like, hey, I don't want to wait the week it'll take Panama to form my company. Let me just come down and open. Why don't you just plan ahead and just go once the company's formed, or find a way to open the account remotely, or find a way to have someone else open the account for you, or whatever else. So the idea that you don't want to wait around for a company to be formed, hence why you want a shelf company, it's sitting on the shelf, you just take it with you. You don't need to wait for the bespoke model, is pretty silly these days. The next reason that the shelf company is pretty silly is banks want to know everything about you. The days where it's like, oh, the banks will trust you more if you buy our company that was established 4 years ago, they don't really care. In fact, they probably would be suspicious, quite frankly. Like, why do you have this company that's been around for 4 years and like now you own it? There are some countries where that's more common. We had a structure in Belgium once, and to shut down the company, we literally had to like sell it. And the new buyer, because they didn't want to set up a company, had to like pay us for the share. Oh, it was such a bureaucratic mess. But nobody who's seeking an offshore company or tax incentives is setting up a company in Belgium by any means. So outside of examples like that, banks are going to say like, well, why did you take over this dormant company from someone who's just been basically paying the annual renewal fee? By the way, that annual renewal fee that the incorporator's been paying all those years, they're baking that into the company. The longer the company's been around, you're paying them back for the agent fees or for the registry fees that they've got to pay every year for the last 2, 5, 10 years, however long it is. That's all added in, which is why the longer a company's been seasoned, the more you would pay for it. And on top of that, the banks they want to know about you. They want to know your business plan. They want to know what you're going to do. They don't really care what the history of the company was, because the company has no history. It's simply been around longer. It doesn't really make any difference to them. And so I think the banks are going to wonder, like, why is this different if you want a bank account? Maybe a crypto exchange wouldn't care as much. I think a brokerage account maybe wouldn't care as much, but it's just not necessary. And obviously some people in this process have done some improper stuff. So you don't want to be backdating things. You don't want to be doing anything that's wrong. They call me the goody two-shoes of the offshore world, and I stand by that. I think that a lot of this shelf company stuff with these weird online incorporation services, these nameless, faceless services, have gotten people into trouble because they're saying, oh, just sign here as if you started the company and we'll send that to the bank. Well, that's a terrible idea. You don't want to do that. And so the bottom line is you've got no tax benefits. You've got no banking benefits. You've got no privacy benefits. People mention things like bearer shares. Now we're really getting old school. I mean, you've got no benefits of having a shelf company rather than just starting your own company, giving it a proper name, admitting I'm starting a new business. People start new businesses all the time. Fortune 500 companies start new companies all the time. No one's like, oh, this business has only been open for 3 months. What's going on here? So if you're stuck in this old school world of incorporation mills who are trying to sell you old-fashioned solutions like shelf companies, don't walk, run the other way.